Our panel structure will be different from the ones we've had earlier today, in that each of us will do her own thing, and in my case, his. And because as we did this, the moderator wanted to be on the panel as well. So I felt it was awkward figuring out how to interview myself. So I said, let's just do this in a normal presentation mode. And we thought we had a sequence, but then Anthony set up the slides in a different role than we had. And we'll let each of the other panelists introduce themselves briefly. So the discipline is we're going to try to deliver each of our talks in 7 to 8 minutes. Being kind of a measurement guy, I actually brought my phone that's pre-programmed now for 8 minutes. So I'll start pacing around here if we get too long. And that would leave us at least the 15 minutes for interaction with the audience as you ask us questions. Because I actually think there are some quite innovative approaches to this sector that are going to all be represented here. And they're different, and each one of them, present company accepted, is wonderful. And so we should just get started. And I think we're going to have Holly go first. So let's go through this. So Hannah is the only one without slides. So this is Hannah, but she'll come later in the presentation. And this is Holly from BLab. And she will tell you what the B represents. That's part of the talk.
Ooh, I'll try. I don't know if we've even defined what the B stands for. So as Robert mentioned, my name is Holly ENSIGN-BARSTOW, and I work for BLab. I've been there for about 7.5 years now, heading up the department that we call Mission Alignment. BLab itself is a nonprofit. We were founded about 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, by 2 entrepreneurs and an investor. They were trying to create tools and programs for companies that were founded with a purpose or a mission, and that wanted to see if they could protect that mission over time, even through new money, new management, or even new ownership. They also wanted to see if they could create tools for consumers and investors to tell good companies apart from just really, really good marketing. So they founded BLab as a nonprofit to create the tools and programs that would serve that need, with the end goal of creating a shared and durable prosperity for all. We are most well known for 3 different products. The first is B Corp certification, certified B Corp. The second is the B Impact Assessment. And the third is the Benefit Corporation Legal Tool. So B Corp certification, certified B Corp, often just called B Corp in the press, is a certification for good business that is conferred by the nonprofit BLab. It is akin to fair trade for coffee or organic for milk, except it's comprehensive. So it takes into account every area of a company's operations and impact, from how you treat your workers, to the society, to the environment, as well as if your end product is actually designed to solve a problem or serve a need. We call that an impact business model. So it is a holistic certification. It's not just an end product certification. And certified B corporations all have to do 3 things in order to be certified. They have to have high levels of social and environmental performance. They have to be transparent about that performance by having information about their scores and how they achieved those scores on our website. They have to sign our Declaration of Interdependence, and they have to make a legal commitment to have broad purpose and to consider their stakeholders in their decision-making processes. All of those certified B corporations demonstrate that high level of performance on our online system called the B Impact Assessment. That is a free tool that is available for any company to use that houses our social and environmental standards. It is accessible to all companies, so we've had about 80,000 companies go through that. So it has tons of amazing benchmarking information, help guides, templates that can really assist companies who are interested in measuring, managing, and improving their impact over time. We have now 2,800 certified B corporations in 60 different industries and 160 different countries throughout the world. The size of certified B Corps ranges from small, tiny consultant companies based in Colorado to giant multinational companies to incredibly well-known brands like Stonyfield, like Patagonia, like the Gap Inc. subsidiary Athleta. And they're pretty amazing companies. The third thing that we are very well known for is the benefit corporation legal tool. Back when we started the certification about 11 years ago, we recognized that there was actually a structural problem that was preventing mission-driven entrepreneurs from making a real commitment to their stakeholders and from protecting that mission and that commitment over time. And that's actually traditional corporate law. Traditional corporate law tells a C Corp or an S Corp that the one duty of their directors is to create value for their shareholders. And any other consideration, any other purpose can easily be forced aside. Now, corporations do lots of nice things. They donate to charity. They have one-for-one models. But in reality, those programs and commitments all exist at the pleasure of the shareholders. And when the rubber really hits the road, a lot of those commitments can easily disappear. And so BLab recognized this as a major problem facing mission-driven entrepreneurs, and we created a solution, which is the benefit corporation. A benefit corporation is essentially a for-profit traditional corporation. It's built on top of the traditional corporate law. You enjoy all the same protections and permissions as a traditional corporation. You just opt into additional obligations regarding your purpose, your accountability, and your transparency. So you have a broader purpose beyond just create and profit. You are now, as a director, accountable to your stakeholders as well as your shareholders. And you're transparent about what you did to consider those stakeholders and have that broader purpose over the course of the last reporting period. There are now 37 different states in the United States that have passed benefit corporation legislation into law. It was just signed by the governor in Maine last week, and it's now in 3 additional countries: Italy, British Columbia, Canada, and Colombia. There are also 8,000 benefit corporations in the United States. This has really gone mainstream. You'll see a benefit corporation in the portfolio of almost every VC investor now, from Andreessen Horowitz to Kleiner Perkins to Sequoia to Benchmark. It's pretty much everyone has a benefit corp. They've raised over $2 billion total. It's actually closer to $3 billion now. And we've had a benefit corporation IPO. Laureate Education IPO'd back in 2017. They got no pushback on their benefit corp status, and now BlackRock, Vanguard, and Fidelity are some of their biggest holders. So this is progressing and is becoming something that's increasingly acceptable to mainstream investors. This is just a little case study of a benefit corp. Allbirds is the amazing wool shoe company that you will see on the feet of pretty much every tech bro in Silicon Valley. I know, I'm kidding, I love them, I have 2 pairs. They are a really cool company. They incorporated as a benefit corporation because they wanted to protect their mission over time. And they had a vision of scaling. And they went out and raised a bunch of money as a benefit corporation, saw no pushback, saw it as really integral to their value proposition. They recently did another fundraising round, or capital raise, and they raised $77 million at a $1.5 billion valuation. So benefit corps are now unicorns, which is pretty amazing. And this year, they also committed to go carbon neutral. So they'll do that through a combination of offsets and changes in their supply chain, like moving from virgin polyester for their shoelaces to recycled polyester. And that's it. So I got in under the deadline.
So this is really a remarkable innovation. It may seem simple, but it transforms the governance and allows corporations to really explicitly take on doing well socially, environmentally, at the same time they're doing well for the shareholders. So it's a great new tool in governance. And so that's the topic of this panel, is how do we modify the governance model to take on this broader perspective of inclusive growth. So great contribution. DEEPA is up next, the consultant on design, and I'm looking forward, because I haven't heard this talk, on how good design will lead to good governance. So go ahead, Deepa.
The link between governance and design isn't necessarily obvious, but I think there are two benefits. They're both direct and indirect. Indirectly, design is really critical for achieving scale, and I think that in turn attracts a lot more players, attracts a lot more scrutiny, and it can improve governance indirectly. And I also have some cases where design has been explicitly created to improve governance. So the first starting point about creating scale is that market size is not static. Design actually transforms market size. And you can see through this process of many iterations, in the modern world, a cell phone is the best example of really transforming a need into a want into a need. You really have this very universal distribution of a fundamental technology. And through that process, I can't imagine these were the original consumer personas when the cell phone was being created. But I think there was an early commitment to inclusion in a lot of the tech industry, and you can see the impact of that, both in the consumers, but also the players who made it possible. You've created billionaires on the top, and you've also created opportunity at the base of the pyramid. And I think that's a really important lesson. We have a lot of local involvement once the model is created. And we also have really exciting new technology like this $20 smartphone that just came out. And I think if you have teenagers, you wish that all of them would use that and stop wasting their time. So I think this is the fundamental lesson, though. You can't have impact by using dumbed down old tech. You have to give really leading edge smart solutions and provide sufficient quality and choice if you want to drive impact. The second thing is, even if profit is nowhere in your agenda, even if you're talking about impact on its own, there's still tremendous innovation that needs to be done in terms of both tools and narrative. The idea of Indian independence existed for 75 years before Gandhi ever came on the scene. It's only in the use of that spinning wheel and the narrative around self-sufficiency that impact was able to be created. And the third is design is about action. It's not about aesthetics. There are a lot of trends that can be felt before they can be precisely measured. We all know there are more dual-income families, there's a co-parenting culture, there are same-sex couples with children. We don't necessarily have to chase great precision on the obvious before we start giving people support and understanding, oh, the implication of that trend is I need to have a diaper change facility in the men's restroom. Those are simple things that allow people to move forward in their lives. People can and do change when they have the tools to do so. And we see this lesson over and over again. So if I take a look at some of the new things that have been tried in terms of education, these are all very, very different design artifacts. So one laptop per child, I think most of us are familiar with. There's a multitude of apps on the phone. Room to Read decided to create libraries in the developing world. When they did so, they realized that some countries were so poor they didn't even have children's literature. So what they did was they enlisted students to create original titles, and they've created over 800 student-written titles. Akshay Patra is an organization in India that said, well, we don't want anyone dropping out of school because they're hungry and to support their family with food, so they provide a nutritious meal. So the point here, I could add sanitary pads, you don't want to put that on a slide, but many other things. And what you really see is that the design artifact is in some cases irrelevant. All of these have achieved a lot of scale and a lot of impact. And it's important for a simple reason. Whatever the cases of poverty may be, they all manifest themselves as a lack of personal choice. So if we did nothing more than increase the amount of choices available, we're probably already having some impact on poverty. And I think we don't also have to have perfect solutions. Something like the Ring doorbell, their new research suggests that once 10% of the houses in a neighborhood have Ring, crime goes down 50%. So we don't necessarily have to wait for the perfect solution. But let's look at cases where we've tried to make much more deliberate and targeted attempts to design governance. So I know there's some fans of blockchain here, but you see some industry-wide efforts to get all kinds of industries from carpet weaving to cocoa to lots of coffee to comply and show certification of their supply chains with blockchain. There's a very new initiative, only about a month old, called Loop, where they've had signed up 100 brands and created an e-commerce platform. They really want to create the circular economy. They've partnered with logistics partners, and they will deliver reusable packaged goods that you would buy anyway in beautifully designed packaging. All of these companies have agreed to create packaging that can be reused 100 times. The huge government ID project in India was another attempt to really say, let's for the first time make everyone accountable for what happens to citizens and give a digital identity. So these are all huge government and industry-driven initiatives, but there's so many simple behavior-based initiatives that can work as well. Amul is one of the leading dairy producers in India, and they actually, when they started out, had a huge problem because they collected milk from a lot of smallholder farmers at a time when adulteration was extremely common. So they just created a business model switch where they started paying farmers based on the fat content of their milk rather than the volume. So no moralizing, very simple, not a lot of education involved. They just simply took away any incentive to cheat. And that in turn allowed them to grow. India is today the world's largest dairy producer. Amul still disperses millions of dollars in cash, and they have a huge network of dairy suppliers all over the country. And I also think that startups and everyone has the option today to be inclusive at birth. This is one of my favorite projects I've been involved. We've gone from prototype to full-fledged factory in 4.5 years. This is what all of us see as roofing in the slums. And one of my friends who I've mentored basically called and said, I want to do something. I want to create a modular roof that can be retrofitted on existing brick walls. And over 250 iterations later, we're able to create 80% of the strength of concrete. The base material for this roofing is waste cardboard. It's been fortified. There is also the waterproofing is made from waste plastic. This can be installed in a day, and the most exciting part of it is that we're finding that about 30% of the customers within 6 months of getting it start or expand a new business. And I think this really exemplifies, Muhammad Ali said, it's not the mountains in the distance that wear people down, it's the pebble in your shoe. So the removal of barriers is an incredibly powerful way that all of us can have scale and impact. So let me just end by saying we have a wish list of possibilities. 1 billion people have moved out of extreme poverty since 1990. There are 5 billion mobile phones. There's a global payments infrastructure, and there's a changing conversation about the role of business in society. You couldn't have asked for a better, convergence of different things. So I think all of us have to look forward and say, it's difficult, yes, but when you put all of these things together, we have the capacity to be the fairy godmothers of the modern world.
Well, thank you very much, DEEPA. Lots of great examples there. So we'll now turn to Hannah. And Hannah, like we heard before in MasterCard and early this morning with Kaiser, is an employee of a large and mature organization. And the question is, how do these large, mature organizations foster innovation and entrepreneurship within that in order to foster inclusive growth? So with that as context, Hannah, explain your organization and your role.
Will do. Thank you. Am I on? I think so. Great. Yes, thanks. And I am, as Robert said, the odd panelist out who has no slides, but there are a few brochures around that kind of give you the overview of our approach to what I'm going to be talking about, and I'll try to make it as tangible and concrete in my remarks as possible, too. So the topic of today and of this panel was actually really interesting to me personally because I feel like it sort of connects the arc of my career so far. I started out in in international development, working in agricultural value chains, actually, with a market systems approach and trying to think about how do we influence incentives and relationships to promote broader-based benefits for smallholder farmers and things like that. And then I shifted over to the investor side because I wanted to look at how we more directly could support local entrepreneurs that I felt like were a good bet for sustainable change in their communities. And also was interested in kind of the role and maybe responsibility of financing to set and influence incentives in a system. So I currently work for Nuveen, which is the asset management business of TIAA. Some of you might know the Teachers Insurance and Retirement Company fund. And in total, Nuveen manages about $950 billion in assets. And a portion of this is dedicated to impact investing and other responsible investing or ESG strategies. But we do have kind of an ambition to think about and look at impact, social and environmental impact, positive and negative, intended and unintended, across all of our assets. And so responsible investing, the division where I sit within Nuveen, is kind of comprises 3 pillars. So that's ESG integration. ESG is environmental, social, and governance. Engagement with companies and with the market on those kinds of issues. And then impact, which is inclusive of impact investing, where we have that kind of target or a specific objective that we're aiming toward, but also the other kind of impact that I mentioned, the sort of incidental impact that happens anyway. And so they created about a year ago this position that I have now, which is the Director of Impact. And so my job is focused on managing our social and environmental impact of our investments. And I do work on projects kind of across asset classes that we manage, but I actually thought for today I would start by focusing on one of the portfolios that's most relevant to this topic, and then we can kind of meander from there in the Q&A if needed. So over the past 10 years, we have invested about $500 million in what we call inclusive growth strategies. It's part of the private equity impact investing portfolio at Nuveen, and it's actually inclusive growth is the term that we use for one of the 3 themes. The other 2 are affordable housing and resource efficiency. And for us, inclusive growth is about increasing the availability of basic services like financial services, healthcare, education, many of the things that my co-panelists have already touched on. And we're especially focused on underserved populations and especially on emerging markets. So the idea is that the businesses that we invest in can provide higher quality services at lower cost than the alternatives that exist. And by doing so, they can help the poor better contribute to and benefit from broader economic growth. So I wanted to give an example of an investment. I feel the one example pales in comparison to the many examples that we've already had, but I'll try to take it a little bit in depth with one investment that we made into Sammunati, which is an agricultural lender in India. They specialize in providing loans for farmers and other agribusinesses, and in particular, they sort of design for the needs of the smallholder farmer and appropriate financial products, for example, that might not require collateral, which is often a barrier for farmers. And their approach, to make it sort of holistic, also includes market linkages and advisory services. So they think that these 3 pieces of finance, advisory services, and market linkage together are really what increase benefits for the agribusinesses and smallholder farmers that they work with. So we recently invested $55 million, leading a Series D round for Sammunati. And this investment is going to help the company scale up their current book size and expand into other geographies in India, as well as into other value chains like fruits and vegetables. So this is the kind of service provision, that can go a long way, especially given the context that a majority of people depend on agriculture for their livelihoods in a place like India. And then I wanted to say a bit about our role in kind of governance, since that's the topic. And for me, that really turns the conversation here to impact measurement and management and our role in that. So our team engages with investees kind of right along throughout the investment process. to make sure that they're managing toward both their impact and business goals, which in the case of companies we invest in are generally interlinked. So we look for those companies where being successful in business will go along with more positive social and environmental impact. But importantly, we require reporting on impact indicators or kind of KPIs that are determined by the investees to make sure that they're relevant and feasible for the investees to collect. But we put that in our deal documentation and make sure that we are going to get enough information to have those conversations with the investees and kind of make sure we're tracking toward our inclusive growth goals. And we also specify the frequency of that reporting. And going forward, we're also ramping up these impact measurement efforts to strengthen that feedback loop to the investees. So in addition to just kind of the signaling effect of the fact that we are collecting this data and we're starting the conversation about what does it mean that we want to know about these impact metrics, we also want to increase the sort of data and analysis that we can provide back to the investees so that they can see sort of how we consider their impact and what their performance looks like relative to peers in our own portfolios. And so I'll just wrap up by mentioning that I spoke about this particular private equity portfolio, but we're also working on building kind of bigger and better data sets to measure and manage the positive and negative impact across other asset classes, including corporates and in our bond portfolios as well. And we have this really kind of data-driven, and I mentioned sort of integrated approach, and I think touching on scale, which is sort of the other big theme here, we can think about it in two ways. We can think about scaling by helping a company like Samunati grow and scale the services that they're provided. But then also, we're a nearly $1 trillion asset manager. So what does scale look like when we really think about using data on social and environmental impact across all of the assets that we influence and manage? And so that really kind of wide-reaching, larger type of approach. So I'll leave it there.
Just one quick question here. It sounds like you would not be disappointed if some of the enterprises you invested in registered as a B corporation.
I would not be, no.
Yeah, it would fit right in.
I think that would be a
with
good
that
fit, yes.
kind of thing. Okay, you can start. No, I have to get to my slides here. So you've heard about what currently exists. I mean, 3 very innovative approaches. And I'm actually going to talk about a governance model that doesn't yet exist. And so we're thinking about this as one to be designed. And it's really to be designed, if we think about this as our unit of analysis, which is an agricultural supply chain. So at the bottom, I don't know if I have a pointer, I don't think I have a pointer on this, are the smallholder farmers. And DEEPA talked about that we still have 1 billion people left with income of less than $1.50 a day, and 70% of them are smallholder farmers. So this has to be a focus for poverty alleviation. And George, in his opening remarks this morning, we talked about our role of creating an ecosystem around connecting the dispossessed to corporations and global supply chains. And if you look about what the supply chain looks like, there's about a dozen different input providers or intermediaries here, the financial institutions, companies like Syngenta or Bayer, providing seeds, crop protection, the tractors, someone was mentioning that invention. And then these intermediaries who are taking the offtake from the crop and storing it and reprocessing it to sell to end corporations. So when you think about governance, is if we end up trying to create one of these ecosystems, how do you govern it? Right? Because you have a dozen different sets of cats here. And some are in the public sector, and there could be NGOs involved who are not yet here showing up that could play a productive role. So rather than answer that question directly, I go back to my Balanced Scorecard days, which was done in Legacy Palladium with Dave Norton. And 10 years ago, we wrote an article about a joint venture. And as we wrote that article, we learned that most alliances fail. So this is depressing news if we're trying to create a very complex ecosystem, to learn that even when 2 private sector companies, a supplier and a customer, try to come together in a strategic way, most of those don't deliver the desired results. So the statistics are on the top. The reasons is, even though we go into these with good intentions, such as after a full day of event like this, the lawyers take over, and we write legal contracts, and that ends up governing the alliance. We don't have the benefit of the B Corporation. And we have lots of great benefits we say we're going to offer, but business goes back to business as usual. And each side is trying to maximize the slice of the pie it gets, and they're more interested in extraction rather than in growth. So this is a problem that all alliances face, and especially how do we avoid this in the new complicated sets of alliances. So the Kaplan-Norton innovation of the strategy map and the balanced scorecard has been used by organizations to align all of their organizational units and their people to a common strategy. And it gives us this multidimensional view of metrics, in this case designed for financial performance. What we learned, what Dave and I learned as we implemented this and saw other organizations implement it, is the biggest benefit from creating the strategy map and balanced scorecard were not the metrics at the end result, useful as they were, and they will be in our model, but creating the metrics and agreeing on the strategy map and how we should measure our performance created a clarification about the strategy and a consensus around implementing it among the executive team that never existed before. So they said the scorecard was great. The process that got us to the scorecard has been the most powerful. So let's just keep that message in mind. And so the article that we wrote had to do with a supplier and a customer coming together. They individually had all been balanced scorecard companies, and they had this novel idea, why don't we create a balanced scorecard for the alliance? And let's come together to agree why we're coming together in this strategic way. What are the objectives and what are the measures that we have to do? And the second bullet was what I just said. This is the process of the two groups coming together and agree what each group saw from the alliance and understanding what the other group wanted from the alliance created a clarity about what the objectives for the alliance would be, created understanding and trust, words that were used earlier today, but without a measurement underpinning to really show how to generate that. And then each organization could go back and explain to its corporate parent why they were doing the alliance and what the benefits would be for them for staying in the alliance. And downstream provided the basis for quarterly meetings among the people in the alliance to see how well are we doing. Are we on course? Where are the problems? What do we have to do better? Because you had data and you had measures to do this. Okay, so take that example, and we have others, and try to think about how can we do this for this far more complex ecosystem that we're trying to create for inclusive growth. And so this idea is, how do we get people to come together to create a strategy map for the inclusive growth ecosystem? And use the structure of the scorecard, but the expanded structure of the scorecard that reflects environmental and social performance. So on the top, it's not just financial performance under business, but what societal impact are we trying to have with the people on the ground? And what is our impact on the environment? How do we reduce the degradation of the environment and potentially even improve it? And then you think about all the various stakeholders, the people around the circle there. What are they trying to get? And so we could have multiple boxes there for each type of stakeholder. The banks, the insurance companies, the mechanical equipment supplier, the intermediary trading organization. And what critical processes do we have to perform in order for this to be successful? What collaboration has to exist? What kind of financing can we get? And what kind of new information about the environment and about the growing process. And the learning and growth down here is how do we introduce the new organizational model. So the details on this are less important, but just the idea of a strategy map for the enterprise. And then once we have that, and maybe for the enterprise, it's the lead corporation. And the lead corporation could be the cocoa company, Nestle, or it could be Unilever. It's one of those purchases, or Mars candy bars. And it has its triple bottom line strategy map. But we also create this for the smallholder farmer. How are they going to be benefit? And an awful lot of finance has been good for the financing organization, but it hasn't been quite as good for the person on the ground. Yeah, they got their money and they paid it back, but how much did their income go up? How did their socioeconomic status change? Those are all measurable, and we have to think about what kind of measures and engage them in the process. You know, so they understand what's happening with all the other entities taking place. And the local intermediary, who now has a much more enhanced role of taking the crops and from the smallholder and also training the smallholder, you know, they have objectives that they have to deliver on. And they're linked. That's the idea of an ecosystem, that the objectives of one could be linked to some of the objectives of the other. And I know we can create this. We can create those scorecards, and this will solve the measurement problem, it'll solve the alignment problem. And so this idea, and this is the last slide, thank you, is the new governance model is to get multiple players from the private, public, and NGO sector, all of whom are interested in the unit of analysis, which is this new ecosystem we're trying to create. They all work together to create what, you know, what does that strategy look like, and having them co-create it together. And we're indebted to DEEPA's father for the idea of co-creation, what a powerful tool that is. And now they're all not only create it, they become accountable for it. You know, they own it, it becomes theirs because they helped to create it. And then use that going forward as your governance model, because at the end of this, every one of those strategy maps has measures that are linked to the success of every individual player has to win, and the alliance as a whole has to win. So anyway, that's our idea of a 2B governance model there for going forward. So thank you. Sorry, I ran over my own liberty. We still have about 10 minutes for as we hope for interchange. I'm not going to do my Charlie Rose bit here, so you can. For very different governance models. Yes, please.
Hello, thank you. That was a really cool and interesting perspective across all organizations. I have a question around the strategy map and the ecosystem. We at MasterCard spend a lot of time thinking about how do we get the whole ecosystem on board and how do we align incentives. What happens when there are winners and losers? So for example, as the smallholder farmer benefits, lots of middlemen actually lose out on being able to take advantage of them. How do you think about poor incentives in the ecosystem?
So that's why in stage one is ideation, and you have to imagine what your new ecosystem should look like. And if you don't need some of the existing players, they're not invited to the table. So get the people, the 2B ecosystem, and make sure those players are there. Now, you may want to think about, is there some useful role for the people you're going to disintermediate here? We have found, you know, in the physical supply chains that those intermediaries are absolutely the crucial link. They're just underperforming because they don't understand how to connect better to downstream corporate buyers or upstream to the sources of talent or the sources of agriculture. But in any case, design the ecosystem, think about what it is, and get those players there. And they don't have to worry about, if someone's left out, they don't have to worry about them because you're going to be self-contained and sustainable and growth. Does that make?
Hi, thank you for that. It's a fantastic range of different solutions. I mean, I think this potentially cuts across all of them, but I mean, I think this idea of the co-creation and the journey being the design journey and the journey in terms of the balanced scorecard, the strategy map being the point, in a way, that you co-create the agenda and the metrics that drive the solution. I work for the Global Fund, and I think...
Yeah. And the governance model.
Sorry?
And the governance model downstream.
Well, and that's what I was coming to, is you know, the Global Fund is an example of a co-created solution. It was driven by an emergency. It was driven by an HIV epidemic that was running out of control. We heard some models earlier around cocoa and cotton that are driven by a market failure. So I'm interested, I guess, in thinking what organizes the co-creation? What is it that creates the point of intersection, the point of action, that really mobilizes people to engage at scale in those solutions? So is it a humanitarian emergency like HIV? Is it a failure in the market that we see in cotton and cocoa? But what's the organizing principle?
Eduardo, do you want to answer that? I mean, I can answer, but I feel like... Yeah, in a way, that's how Eduardo and I got into this, is sometimes it needs kind of, someone even used the term an honest broker earlier today, and so maybe an independent outside organization that's kind of B Corporation qualified. It's very mission-oriented to have positive social and environmental impact, can be the convener to first do some of the ideation, but then bring the people together who they think are part of the solution. And it's hard for a corporation to do this because they will be perceived as self-serving. We're doing this to work for them, and they're going to extract all the rents. So even corporations who might think they know how to do this may find it useful to have an outside, somewhat independent party be the convener. We use the word catalyst because what you're doing is stirring the pot and creating a chemical reaction, even though you're not an integral player within that reaction. Is that? So now, it doesn't have to be a private consulting company. It could be an NGO. It could be other types. In one case in rural Mississippi, the head of the Economic Development Agency in the county turned out to be the catalyst. And he got financing for industrial park. He got access to financing for companies that wanted to come in here. He talked to the companies. He went to went to the community colleges to get them to run training programs. So he was the head of an economic development agency, and now all of a sudden rural Mississippi is kind of a little pocket of really active industrial manufacturing activity. It's fantastic. And everybody is winning. Everybody is winning, and it's self-sustaining. Once you get past the initial round of funding, the ecosystem is creating value for everybody.
Can I just add quickly? I was watching the clock. So I think the really exciting part about technology is not that everyone has a cell phone. For all of us who are trying to design solutions, what the impact of that is that the cost of learning has gone way down. You don't have to guess at people's preferences, beliefs. There is big data for poor and rich alike today, which there wasn't before. So you can ask directly and get answers to a lot of those questions, which is something really new, but it just requires a lot of behavior change and a mindset shift, because the information asymmetry at the bottom was well known and everybody was always trying to correct for that. It exists at the top as well, and to the extent that you can engage directly, that's also an absolute key to long-term engagement. When people know directly that, oh, this is who I'm helping, this is who is helping me too. If you look at a lot of the game-changing innovations and ESG goals, we really can't meet them unless we synthesize ideas from all sectors. A company like Tata found this water filter, like one of the main things is coconut fiber. That actually removes 80% of the pollutants, but they added nanoparticles, and then they get a filter that really works, and they can put their brand on it. So I think we spend a lot of time trying to figure out the nanoparticles and do very little exploration on what are the other coconut fiber type of things that we can use. And that's how we can deliver at a price point and a story and a design that can connect with a lot of people across the globe.
I have a question on the app. I believe it's for Holly. External verified certification schemes can end up being a tick box exercise rather than bringing about real change. What makes the B Corporation scheme different? How do you ensure real outcomes and change?
Companies have to recertify every 3 years, and in between we actually redo our standards. So as they recertify, the standards are actually getting harder. So we have companies that have to work harder each certification period to actually get certified again. And then all certified B corporations have to make a legal commitment to have a broad purpose and to consider their stakeholders. Some of them do that by becoming benefit corporations. Some of them do that in other ways. But that's the real teeth of the certification. If you think about it, performance is really about the past. It's about the present. But the legal is about ensuring that performance continues into the future.
So Holly, building on that, have you considered using the independent external auditors to not only verify the financial statements, but verify and validate the processes that are generating the data for their societal impact?
We have thought about it. I think to really scale this movement, we are going to have to rely on external evaluators or external verification for the information. Right now, that's all done in-house. And we're a nonprofit. We're only, at this point, about 90 people. So truly scaling this movement is going to require some outside
You
verification.
shouldn't do it, but I mean, there are auditors coming into 90% of those
totally.
companies to validate the financials, and they can validate these other
Yep.
processes as well.
The only thing I'd say is that the information, this is not publicly available information, so it's slightly harder information.
But many private companies still have external auditors.
Yeah.
But, okay, that's a great question. Any more of those sitting out there?
That was a good one. I can't claim credit.
Okay, it's one in the back. Yeah, go.
Yeah, if I can take a shot at one. Maybe our panelists from Nuveen would be well positioned to talk about this, or anyone else. But just like Bob was demonstrating how, and also our B Corp panelists, talking about how the policy environment can set sort of the governance framework, we also know that the financiers can also sometimes set the rules for how things are going to work. And so coming back to the issue of changing ecosystems, and particularly the issue of how do we finance new business models within, or a new ecosystem, I'm wondering if you have any illustrations or examples of financial instruments or financial inclusive models where you've all been involved in that start touching on new ways of financing multi-stakeholder situations.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would actually say on the private equity side, we tend to be pretty normal because the instrument itself is normal, but we're looking at deals that other private equity investors might not be looking at. So it's not the instrument itself where you need to innovate. It's more, how you learn about what you might be investing in and the perspective on it, and kind of being deeply there so that you can understand it a different way. There's actually one interesting example I'll just speak to briefly, because I know we're running over, but on the fixed income side of a blue bond, the first blue bond that we were involved in structuring. And so this is an instrument where the government of the Seychelles was raising capital through a bond. It's backed up and guaranteed by the World Bank, who then came to us as a well-known kind of fixed income investor and said, does this look like something you might be interested in helping us structure and bring in other investors into? And so, and it was important for us actually to bring in other investors, because the portfolio manager will tell you he wanted to make sure that there were at least a couple of other people at other firms who knew what this thing was inside and out, right? So, and the idea behind that is it's a blueprint that other, especially, if they look similar to Seychelles Island nations, can use to raise money for essentially like marine conservation. And they're raising money right on the kind of tradable bond capital markets that mainstream investors like us are participating in. So I don't know, I thought that was kind of an interesting new structure that we were involved in.
Yeah, one of our thoughts is to create some financing vehicle for the new ecosystem. And even in the innovative financing panel earlier this afternoon, they were still financing individuals and corporations. The idea, how do you finance an ecosystem? But George, I thought he might talk on this, is to think about a special purpose vehicle that is set up for the ecosystem, with return coming from some financial performance collectively out of all the participants there that would pay it back. So that would be a completely new form of financing, specifically directed at inclusive growth ecosystems. So that's, again, kind of our thinking about the future, about where innovation can come in here.